Good morning again, everyone. We're excited to get started here in a couple minutes. This is Anna Swanson. I'm in our Chicago office, and I'm joined by my colleague Adrian Salmon across the pond.
Hello.
Good morning, Adrian, or good afternoon, I should say. Just going to go through a couple logistics for you this morning. There are a couple ways for you to ask questions or interact with our webinar today. There's a Q&A portion of the Zoom meeting, and there's also a place for you to chat. So if you're having trouble hearing or need to talk to someone helping moderate this webinar today, those are the two places that we would suggest you interact with us. We'll be walking you through this presentation, and certainly we'll take your questions as they come, if appropriate, but also we'll have a few minutes at the end for us to have a quick discussion about what we've covered. So I think we'll get underway. Thanks again for joining us today. We're really excited to talk about fundamentals of the annual fund, retention, acquisition, and driving total dollars. I'm likely preaching to the choir this morning to talk about why annual fund is important, but just wanted to cue us up for the idea that annual fund is what drives major giving. It's what drives eventual bequest intentions. But annual giving isn't all the same. You can look at your annual giving opportunities in many different buckets, but all of them drive that donor pipeline and drive individuals to have the opportunity to engage at lower levels and potentially becoming major donors, or many people never become major donors and they actually leave bequests to your organization. So everyone on this call, I'm sure, understands the importance of annual fund. We just want to make sure that we're maximizing your efforts toward it. In higher education, there are significant headwinds that I'm sure you've all been experiencing. Between 2016 and 2017, for institutions that reported in both years to the CAE-VSE survey, we found that 62% experienced a decline in participation, and on an average, they were seeing a decline of around just under 9%. 81% of those institutions are at the same time growing the number of alumni that they have in their pool, making it difficult to have that participation stay the same. And on average, that increase has been nearly 8%. On the flip side, 47% saw an increase in overall annual giving. And there were combinations of places where they were receiving larger amounts of total gifts from smaller amounts of alumni, but also places that were having increased participation and increased alumni giving, likely because they were approaching their annual giving in the way that we're going to discuss today. But it's more important than ever to make sure that you are identifying your best donors and asking them appropriately for your support of the institution. You know, we want to make sure that as you're approaching donor participation, you're also addressing total dollars. You can potentially have a low dollar approach that gives you a good response, but that's a self-defeating proposition and ultimately can result in devaluing the annual fund more generally for people who have more of an opportunity. So we look at the annual fund as a path, and it's fairly straightforward. We want to make sure that we're analyzing all that we can in data of our donors and those who are participating with us. We want to take that analysis and use it to segment not only from a messaging perspective, but also segment from a reporting perspective. Are you understanding the different pieces of your donor population in the right way? Then we want to craft a compelling message. And within that compelling message, we want to make sure we're testing different opportunities to talk to your donor base in different ways. And then you just keep doing it over and over and over again. And often, frankly, asking often is also important. So for this first portion of analyze, so analysis is extremely important. At a meta level, you have just the fact that there are some people who give and some people who don't. And we want to make sure that in looking at all these different types of data pieces that you have in your CRM or enterprise system, that you're really making sure that you're not spending too much time with people who won't ever give to you. We want to take this data and ensure that you're spending the majority of the time and effort to people who will give to your organization. And for different places, you'll find different pieces of information is more important in identifying that difference. We also want to make sure in that analysis that you get to a point where you understand people's propensity to give. So again, there's some people who will give and some people who will not. Here at GG+A and our philanthropic analytics team, we've devised a system, a modeling system called PCR, or propensity ratings. And we take all of that information that clients give us that I showed on the earlier screen, and we create codes. And those codes show likelihood of their donation. And when we drive all of those attributes together, we see some really compelling information. Number one, a PCR code P1 is your most likely giver. Your PCR code P7 is your least likely giver. And you can see in terms of recency of giving that P7, only 8.8% of this very large population of individuals has given recently to the organization. But when you get up into the P1, you're into that 30.3%. You also see a difference in their average of their giving. So people who are more likely to give also give greater amounts to the organization, and they've done that also over time. So this is really key in identifying who's likely to give and who's unlikely to give so that you can deploy your efforts towards the right population of individuals. So this is GG+A's approach, but you can do similar things within your own data that will help you understand who you should be focusing your time and effort on. Another thing that we believe is very important to analyze is how your donors feel about their interactions with you. This is an example of a GG+A survey from our survey lab that is a stewardship and donor satisfaction scorecard. And we are assessing lots of different things from the donor's perspective of how they've felt interacting with this particular organization. So things like, was my gift accurately and promptly received? Was it easy to make my gift? And we look at that arrayed by different giving levels. So this first column here after the overall score shows our major donors, different categories of major donors. But we also see here in this less than $1,000 range, where most of you would probably identify a lot of your annual fund individuals. And what we see is a lot of opportunities to impact people's experience with their annual fund in terms of donor satisfaction and stewardship. Easy things like, hey, I knew who to contact about my gift. I saw the impact of my gift, things that really are essential. And then you can get into questions of, I'm more likely to give in the future. And we see some troubling things in this particular example, where only 25% of their non-donors were likely to give in the future, and only 36% of people giving fewer than $1,000 were likely to give. So understanding the experience that your donors have been having within various levels of giving, including the annual fund, is extremely important. Another place to analyze is where you have opportunities to ask for more. So in this particular example, we have an organization's data arrayed by annual giving rating. And this is something, again, that our advanced analytics group puts together based upon information of previous giving and individuals' wealth screening scores. And so if somebody has an annual giving rating of less than $100, their average gift has been around $25, 1 to 500, 32, and so on and so forth. So once we get those annual giving ratings, we have an understanding of whether people are giving at their actual capacity. So a person giving $250 might come back and we would see in a raw score that that person actually has the ability to give much more. Maybe they are a $5,000 donor. In this particular example, we aren't actually analyzing whether or not they give to that $5,000 level. We're saying, what happens if they would go up maybe one level? And in this particular example, we're saying, what if you're only successful about 25% of the time? And this is just a place where we see that there's a significant ability to uplift the amount of total dollars raised if you start asking people for the appropriate amount of dollars. So after you've done all that analysis, you get into the fun of segmentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Adrian.
Yeah, so what Anna's been talking about here is, there's two ways of doing annual giving and increasing participation. There's the go at everybody with everything strategy, which we don't believe is the right strategy, because what it does is it undermines the proposition of your annual fund. You end up going down a spiral of decreasing ask rates to decreasing ask amounts to increase response, and you end up putting forward the idea of your annual fund that it's a thing that people just give $5 to. It's a thing that people just give $10 to. Our philosophy is that if you're seeking to uplift participation, you need to seek to uplift revenue as well, because in the end, the revenue drives impact, and the impact drives a compelling message to other people why they should give, and that's the only way that you can set up a virtuous cycle of giving to your annual fund in the long run. So segmentation. So we hear a lot talked about segmentation, you sometimes hear people say, oh, in an ideal world, we'd all have segments of one. Well, actually, we don't buy into that either. That would be craziness. Nobody could handle a segmentation set of that complexity. The whole point of segmentation is that you have a group of, hundreds or thousands of people who all share the same characteristics, and that allows you, and that is good enough that when they receive your messaging, they feel as if you're talking to them as a segment of one. But you're not. You're talking to them as a segment of 500 or 1,000, because one person, as we all know, is very unpredictable, but hundreds of people, thousands of people are much more predictable. So segmentation, your segments should allow for all members to receive the same treatment. If you've got a segment of people, you should be able to send them all the same message without worrying whether it fits, because you've got that right. The other thing is that segments should be large enough that once you've tested, you feel confident in your results. Now, confidence calculations are intricate. There are detailed formulae that you can go into to work out precise levels of confidence for a particular sample size, for a particular population size. But there are some rules of thumb that you can go on as well. So if you're working in the telephone fundraising side of things, then you can probably get away with a sample size of a few hundred people. Maybe 500 people would be a good enough sample size in a telephone campaign to be confident that you had got a valid result from that sample without one or two additional responses swaying it particularly one way or to the other. But that won't work for mail. Sample sizes of 500 are too small. And if you talk to most of the folk who do direct mail day in and out for their living, they'll tell you that they like to be confident sample sizes of thousands before they can make a choice. So your segmentation strategy may vary by channel simply because of the size of the samples that you need. And then the next thing is that if you've got a sample that's only big enough to test to, well, that's all very well and good, but what are you going to do with that learning? Who are you going to roll out to? And so our suggestion is that if all you've got is a few hundred people for a phone segment, and that's it, then you really want to have a think about that and think whether it's a big enough segment for you. Because ideally there should be enough people to roll out to once you've applied your test treatment to the sample to see what's happened. So yeah, segments of one are crazy. What we're trying to do is give the illusion of customization. You know, as Coleridge put it, the willing suspension of disbelief. And of course, you know, segments should share characteristics with which they identify, because ideally you'll be playing back this in the messaging to them. So, you know, if your segment is retirees, or if your segment is people who studied a particular subject, or if your segment is people who graduated in a particular decade, there should be something that links them all together that they can identify with. Anna, could you advance? Thank you. So, and in the end, this is what we're doing. We're segmenting to efficiently use resources. So we want to make sure that we're asking donors with recent giving more frequently. I would argue more than once a year. Depending on the institution or the kind of charity you work for, you may be asking your existing donors anywhere from once to 18 times a year. The Union of Concerned Scientists was asking its donors up to 18 times a year. They've recently tested a strategy that found that with a slight tweak to that, and asking people 4 times a year with 4 feedback appeals interspersed between those solicitation asks, they get as good results. A lot of healthcare charities ask their donors every month. If you gave in October, you get asked in November, and you get asked again in December. So, you know, think about the frequency of your asks, and, you know, are you asking enough? RFM, recency, frequency, and value, tells us that somebody who's given in the last 3 months is a better prospect than somebody who's given in the last 6. And that's a better prospect than somebody who's given in the last 12. So if you're only asking every year, you may not be asking enough. But then the never donors, you want to move those into less costly communication channels, or you want to move them into a less frequent cadence of asking. And of course, you can use the predictive modeling or the propensity scores to do that. You can set up a predictive modeling score very easily. You can do a very simple one just by assigning points to people for certain data characteristics that they have. So if you have an email address, if you have a home address, if they've changed their home address in the last year, you know, all of those things you award points for. They're indicators that somebody is more likely to give. So then we have your segmentation for reporting, your internal segmentation. Now, I would argue that your internal segmentation is something that you should rarely change unless you've got a very good reason for it. And the reason is because this is going to be the segmentation that you're comparing quarter by quarter, year by year. And most institutions do it by frequency and recency of donation, because in the end, that's what's come out as showing to be most meaningful. So here we have Blackboard's target analytics, donor retention benchmarks for US universities. So on the left, the maroon bar, that's not never donors, that's new donors who've given just a first gift to your charity, or your institution in this case. On average, that's about 26% of them are going to give in the next time you ask them. moving along, you've got lapsed donors, donors you haven't given for a year. By and large, 14% of those you'll be able to get back on board. And of course, once you go into the area of multi-year donors, you jump up to retention rates in the 60+% bracket. Now, actually, that's split out again. If somebody's given to you 2 years in a row, there's probably a 50% chance they're going to give again the next time you ask. If somebody's given 3 or more years in a row, a 66% chance. And if they've given more than 5 years in a row, you move into retention rates of 70 or 80% plus. And of course, if you have monthly sustaining donors on an automatic recurring gift scheme, then those donors' retention rates are likely to be in the 85% plus range. So I would argue that RFV, recency frequency values, some people call it RFM, recency frequency monetary value, it amounts to the same thing, should probably be the basis of your internal segmentation. And then if you have other things that are specific and meaningful for your institution, so if, for example, your lawyers always behave differently to everybody else, or your business school people always behave differently to everybody else, or we found in the UK that there's a meaningful difference between the way arts and sciences graduates give in response to appeals. Sciences graduates tend to be better. Our hunch is that's because they stay more engaged with their degree through their years after graduation than arts graduates do. So you could build that in. But your internal segmentation is going to be something that you really want to change. However, you can have your external, your messaging segmentation that can change from piece to piece. And you can have temporary segmentation that you test out from one message or one appeal to the next. And so you may have a decade-based messaging strategy in one communication, you may have a major-based messaging strategy in another, and you're testing out these big, meaningful things to see whether they make a difference. And also things like copy variants. So you may test long copy versus short copy. That is a meaningful segmentation on a direct mail piece. Hint, most of the tests, long copies won against short copy. And there's evidence in email that long copy wins over short copy as well. That's starting to emerge, that email donors behave actually very like direct mail donors. And so then you move on to the message, and you move on to what you actually tell people. So I know if you want to. So the big question is not the big question that you may think, because the big question that seems to be being asked in a lot of the communications materials I look at is, what do we as the institution care about? What are our priorities? What do we want to tell our donors that we want them to give to? Wrong question. The actual big question is, what do alumni or donors care about? And I've got a handy crib sheet here for what alumni or donors care about. This graphic tells you all you need to know. So there you have the sun in the middle. That is the self-resplendent. Alumni care most about themselves. In fact, everybody does. We all do. The word you in a fundraising communication is glue. Our eyes are drawn to it. It's, oh, this is about me. And you can see that very closely in orbit around the ego are my stuff and stuff about me. And a little further out in the orbit, maybe, you know, just before the asteroid belt, maybe in the sort of Mars space, we've got stuff I hate. Still pretty close to us because, well, we hate it. It defines us in opposition to what we like. And then way out beyond the Kuiper belt, we've got others. And after that, we've got nowhere. Now, if in your messaging, you're always talking about your institutions, then the chances are you've put yourself on that very outer ring that alumni and donors care about least, what you want them to give to. There's a great fundraising writer called Jeff Brooks, who says that if you want to write a fundraising letter, start out with writing a list of all the things that you care about and that you want your donors to give to, and that you want to tell your donors, and then tear that list up. Just get it out of your system, tear it up. Then sit down and write another list of all the things that you think are cool about your donors, the things that you think are cool about your alumni, why you love them, why you think they are great people, and why you think they'll be even greater people if they give you a gift. And that is the list that you turn into your letter. So moving on. So here, just to ram this home a little bit, this is from a fundraising, a great fundraiser in the UK called Mark Phillips, who runs an agency called Blue Frog Fundraising. And on the left-hand side are all the things that his clients have told him over the years in creative briefs for direct mail appeals that they want to tell their supporters. And on the right, because his agency does research with supporters as well so that they can do better direct mail, are all the things that supporters have told him and his team in research interviews that they want to hear from charities. And you can see that the Venn diagram only intersects in one place, how we help solve a problem. The things that a donor wants to hear from you are actually very different from the things that you may think you want to tell them. They want to hear what you achieved with their money, why they made the right decision to support you as opposed to another charity, that you value them, that you think they're special, that you're going to ask them how they want you to communicate with them, that you know why they give and what they care about, that you remember things that they may have done and said, and that you and they helped solve the problem together. So, tip for your communications, use this Venn diagram as a tick list. And if you're ticking off more of the things on the left side than you are on the right side, that's an indication that you have to tear up that letter draft and start again. So all very well, how do you put it into practice? So let's show you an example. So this, for many years, I ran the annual giving at the University of Leeds in the UK. And to be frank, when I was there, and for a few years after I was there, our direct mail sucked. It was really poor. And we got to the point of wondering whether our alumni base were actually direct mail responsive at all. And so we decided to do one last final throw of the dice and communicate with them in a completely different way. And this comes from that first pack that we sent them, this new way of doing it, about 6 years ago now. So there was, of course, an outer envelope, a 2-page letter, a donation form. There was also a smaller little note from a student scholarship recipient. But the emotional heart of the piece was this insert, which is in US paper sizes, double letter size. In the UK, we'd say A3. It folded down. And there was one of these for each decade. I'm showing you the one for generic here, where we weren't sure, which they should get. But you can see here that there's, on the left, there's a picture of the trams from the 1950s that used to go on tram lines in front of the main building. There's pictures of the old common rooms as they'd remember them. Down the bottom, that's the Who, the iconic rock band, live at the Students' Union. On the right over here, we've got student protests, graffiti, and 80s hairdos. That was the university they remembered. And on the reverse of the enclosure, we showed them the university as it is today. What's the same, what's different, and why the university needed their help. And all the things that had changed since they were at university that meant that the university needed their support with donations. So we sent this out. We didn't send it to our entire active alumni base. We sent it to maybe a sixth of the active alumni base at the time. And in 8 weeks, from just that group of people, it raised as much money as all the previous direct mail for the past 8 years put together. That's the power of messaging to people with what they remember, what matters to them, rather than what matters so much to you. So this comes into stewardship as well. I'm sure a lot of you will be fans of Charity Water. If you've been around in annual giving for the past few years, they've been one of the charities that's really led the way in excellent online fundraising. This is an example of their stewardship. I signed up to their monthly donor program this spring, and they send me stewardship emails that are unlike any other charity that I donate to, because each stewardship email is just one story. And it's really easy for me to understand the impact of my gift. So this email came to me last year. It told me that this month my donation was going to mean clean water for every single person in this district of Rilindo district. So it's really, you can see it's really beautifully laid out. It's clear storytelling. The design is really subservient to getting the story across to me and encouraging me to keep reading. They want to know that, they want to make sure that I know where Rilindo district is. And they've shown it in a really nice, simple graphic that's easy for me to understand. And then on the next page, they've shown me the impact. And they've shown me how close I am. Goal proximity, really important in fundraising. 95% of the way towards giving everybody in Rilindo district clean water. And I'm going to fill that gap there where they've put the arrow. So, and you can see here, they've offered me the opportunity to share this. They're confident that this is going to wow me enough that I'm going to want to share this and send it to my friends and say, hey, cool, look, see what I'm helping to do with Charity Water. And they track the shares that they get on Facebook and Twitter of their stewardship communications. They actually watch to see what kinds of content get passed on more by their donors, and that gives them an idea of what kind of stewardship messages are resonating with their donor base, as well as their solicitations. So, you know, if you haven't joined up to Charity Water to give a monthly gift, I would recommend doing it just to get the stewardship emails, just so that you can show other people in your institutions, hey, look at this, this is great. So if you want to, so Anna, we're going to talk a little bit about the work we've done with Virginia Tech.
For sure, we are. So we wanted to share an example of what can happen when you put all of these things together. So we were very fortunate to work with Virginia Tech over the last year and a half on their annual fund. And they were given an extremely aggressive goal straight from the top. The president said, I want to increase participation from 9%, what it was when we started our work together, to 22%. You know, beginning to measure that change in 2018 through 2022. And for a very large organization like Virginia Tech, this was a significant undertaking. And so the analysis of the data, the segmentation, the messaging, all came together in a pretty significant 5-year plan. They were also approaching that headwind of significant increases in alumni. So at the very start, each year they were going to have a more difficult percentage goal because of the increased denominator of alumni. And so Adrian and my team dug into this with great gusto and did a very significant analysis and used those PCR, those propensity ratings that I mentioned earlier in the presentation, to really split that database into two. The people who were likely to give and the people who were unlikely to give. And that really helped us take the resources and allocate them toward those most likely givers. And through that, we were able to create a multi-channel communication approach to help Virginia Tech achieve increases year over year. And so after 1 year, we're really excited to show their progress. The participation has increased significantly in a one-year jump from that 9% to 12.3%. So that's a 37% increase in participation right off the bat. And as we alluded to earlier, when you approach participation in the right way, you actually don't have to give on total dollars raised. And this was the exact experience of Virginia Tech, where when you look at the annual fund related to different academic programs, again, asking people for dollars for things that they care about, they saw a 20% increase in the total dollars raised among those different academic annual funds. And they also saw an 8% increase in that overall annual fund, which includes athletics, which is a place where, you know, many places traditionally have very significant support. They saw an 8% increase when they were looking at their overall numbers. As it related to retention, those 5-year consecutive donors, individuals who'd given to Virginia Tech over 5 years, they blew past that general metric of around 80%, and they retained 97% of those donors who'd been giving for the last 5 years, and only saw slippage in about 3% of that population. And they were also able to reactivate donors. So donors that had given in the 2016-2017 who had not given, they were able to reactivate them. 31.7% of them they brought back to the table through this very careful analysis, segmentation, and testing program. And so it goes to show that when you're planful, when you use analysis really effectively, you can be extremely successful both on the participation and the total dollars raised in an annual fund. Adrian, is there anything you'd share about the work that we've done with Virginia Tech?
I think you've covered a lot of it, Anna. I will say that, you know, it was really staggering to see the difference when we did the initial cut of the data. The difference between everybody who'd got a PCR code of any kind and the people who didn't. And the people who we weren't able to give a PCR code to only had a participation rate of about 2%. Anybody with a PCR code of any kind, it was 8% plus, so at least 4 times better. So it was so clear that that was the population that they needed to focus on and that were going to help deliver this long-term participation goal.
Super. Thanks, Adrian. So we've got a few minutes here at the end where we wanted to give you an opportunity to ask questions. You can do that through the Q&A function on Zoom, or you can also do it through the chat. And we did receive one question in the middle of the presentation relative to segmentation. And it was around whether or not we recommend segmenting for donor acknowledgement messaging.
That's a great question. And I would say absolutely yes. I mean, that donor acknowledgement is one of the first opportunities that you've got to make an impact with people. So again, another charity water example. I was one of the first people to join up to their monthly giving program because I'm a nerd and I wanted to see how they were going to run it, but also because they launched it in a very inspiring way with a video. A year later, I got a video message from Scott Harrison, the founder of Charity Water, sent me in my inbox. And in the video message, he specifically referred to me being one of the first people who joined off the back of that video. And he said there were 1,100 people who'd done that out of a total of 10,000 people who'd joined the monthly giving program in the first year. So that meant that they'd specifically created that stewardship message for me as one of those very first people to join. And look at the impact of it. I'm telling you about it now. So yes, absolutely.
Super. Another question I had was, I'm from a smaller institution. Does this really play out for a small institution? I'm not like Virginia Tech. I'll take a crack at that, and then Adrian would love for you to follow on. I actually have the pleasure of running an annual fund for my alma mater, which had an total enrollment of about 1,200 students. And what we would find is actually this process, this segmentation, was even more important for a smaller organization. We didn't have significant resources, and there were just a couple of us running after this annual fund. And so the more data that you're able to deploy within an organization that might be strapped for people, the better. And you can sometimes find significant cost savings when you're able to segment messaging in different ways and acquire and retain donors more efficiently.
And I would add to that if you're in a smaller institution, perversely, the expectations on you are going to be higher. Because you're small, your alumni, your donor supporter audience are going to expect you to know them better. So if you don't segment, if you give them all cookie cutter communications, then they are going to say, what's with this? You know, they're not that big. They could bother to know a bit more about me.
One of another example I have for a smaller organization where the segmentation was really effective was actually in assigning leadership annual giving targets to major giving officers. So they were able to say, we recognize that we have all of these people with higher potential that probably aren't going to go from donating $500 through our direct mail appeal to the $5,000 that we think they might be able to. And so we're going to assign new leadership annual giving targets for all of our major giving officers, as well as our annual giving director themselves to drive those total dollars. And that's frankly something that we suggest to do across the board, whether you're large or small. You can really identify some pipeline opportunity with that data. Well, I'm looking at the clock. I think we've filled 45 minutes of time. If there are any last minute questions, Adrian and I are more than happy to stay on the line and answer those for all of you, and certainly would love to hear from you. If you have specific questions, you're more than welcome to email us. We will be sharing this link after the conclusion of the webinar for you to share with any of your staff or individuals who were unable to make it today. Just also to let you know, we do have another webinar coming up on October 25th. Adrian will also be participating in that webinar, and we'll be sharing that link with you in the follow-up as well. Thank you so much for your time. And like I said, we'll be on for a few minutes if you have other questions, but hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.